Zhang Wei was a man who understood the art of not trying too hard. If laziness were a profession, he'd have a doctorate in it. His life was a series of small, uninspiring events, a slow shuffle from one meaningless day to the next, all punctuated by the occasional instant noodle dinner or an episode of the latest police procedural drama. He was a middle-aged office worker at a nondescript firm in the heart of Shanghai, and he liked it that way. Nothing about his life was worth remembering, and that's exactly how he preferred it. If you asked his co-workers, they'd describe him as the sort of person who never quite lived up to his potential. He was always there, always showing up to work, never late, never early, never stirring the pot or making waves. He was the invisible man of the office, an enigma wrapped in a baggy suit. But Zhang had one small secret. One that he wasn't even aware of. It happened on the regular, though he never paid it any mind. Whenever Zhang was feeling particularly lazy, say, when he was lying back in his cubicle chair, scrolling aimlessly through his phone, things around him started to act a little strange. Files would levitate off his desk just before he knocked them over, the office lights would flicker in rhythm with his mood, and, on rare occasions, small bursts of fire would spark from his fingertips. None of this seemed worth investigating. Zhang would just sigh, let the file float back to the table, put the fire out with a quick swipe, and continue on with his day. He chalked it up to weird coincidences. After all, he didn't like to be bothered by anything that could break his routine. It wasn't until one fateful Tuesday morning, when Zhang accidentally spilled his coffee again, that things truly went sideways. He just walked into the office, grumbling about his lack of sleep, when he bumped into a colleague's desk, sending his cup of hot coffee flying. The office was too quiet. Zhang knew he was about to hear the usual mix of laughs and sarcastic comments. But before he could brace himself, he extended a hand out of reflex. To his surprise, the coffee hovered in midair, spinning back into the cup like a piece of metal attracted to a magnet. Zhang blinked. And then, just to make sure he hadn't imagined it, he casually flicked his wrist. The coffee cup, along with its contents, hovered a few inches above the table, before gently settling back into place. As if nothing had happened, the office fell silent. Everyone stared at him, wide-eyed. His colleague, Su Jing, the office gossip, opened her mouth and shut it again, like a fish out of water. The buzz of whispers started immediately. What just happened? I saw it too. Did you see that? Was that magic? Zhang Wei, caught in the middle of this strange moment, cleared his throat awkwardly, and immediately muttered, I have no idea what just happened. But he did. In that split second, the gears in his brain clicked. He knew what it meant. He wasn't imagining it. For reasons unknown, he had some kind of ability. Just then, the door to the office opened with a sharp whoosh, and a tall, sharply dressed man in his mid-40s stepped in. He had a steel-gray suit that looked like it cost more than Zhang made in a year, and his black leather shoes gleamed as if they'd been freshly polished. He walked like he owned the place. Mr. Zhang Wei? The man's voice was smooth but carried a slight metallic edge. He approached Zhang with a predator's stare, locking eyes with him as if he'd just found a rare specimen in a laboratory. Zhang, still rattled from his accidental display of power, nodded, trying to maintain his usual composure. Yes? Can I help you? The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. I'm Mr. Wu, he said, offering a cold handshake. I'm with Sinotech Group. I'm here because we've been observing you. Observing me? Zhang repeated, raising an eyebrow. Are you sure you've got the right person? I'm just an office worker. Mr. Wu didn't seem fazed. I think you'll find you're much more than that, Mr. Zhang. You have an ability that we've been tracking for some time now. It's not random, and we can use it. Zhang frowned. I don't know what you're talking about. My abilities, if you want to call them that, are nothing more than the beginning, Mr. Wu interrupted, his voice almost sing-song in its calmness. You have the potential to control the elements themselves. Fire, water, air, earth, perhaps even more. We've seen it. The tests have been running for weeks. It's undeniable. Zhang, who had been zoning out, suddenly snapped back into attention. What do you mean, tests? What are you talking about? He could feel his pulse quickening, his brain racing to process what was happening. Let me explain, Mr. Wu continued. Sinotech has developed a new class of weapons. We call them elemental weapons designed to wield the powers you possess. But unlike you, Mr. Zhang, these weapons are engineered to be precise, controlled, and powerful. You could be the key to unlocking their full potential. Zhang stared at him, unable to grasp the implications of the situation. His life, up until this point, had been an endless loop of mediocrity. Now, here was this man telling him he had powers that could be turned into weapons to change the world. The world didn't need another weapon, did it? I'm just trying to live my life, Zhang muttered, feeling overwhelmed. I don't want any part of this. I don't even know how to control it. Mr. Wu's smile widened, as if he had been expecting this reaction. That's where we come in, Mr. Zhang. We'll help you understand your power. And then, we'll help you use it. Before Zhang could protest further, Mr. Wu's assistant, a woman in a sleek black dress, stepped forward and handed him a tablet. On it were videos of elemental weapons in action, soldiers manipulating fire like flamethrowers, others turning the ground into quicksand, some using wind to slice through metal like butter. This is the future of warfare, Mr. Zhang, Mr. Wu said. The ability to control nature itself. It will give us the power to reshape the world. And you are the missing piece of the puzzle. Zhang, suddenly feeling like the room was closing in on him, took a deep breath. He had no idea what to do. He had just gotten used to the idea of having coffee levitate. Now, he was being asked to change the course of history, but before he could make up his mind, Mr. Wu's voice softened. You don't have to decide right away. But we need you. You'll be given everything you need to understand this power. And in return, you'll help us secure control over the world. Zhang stood in silence. For a moment, he wanted nothing more than to go back to his unremarkable life, to sit back at his desk, and ignore all of this. But deep down, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Zhang Wei stared down at the tablet in his hands. The screen flickered as a new video started playing. A soldier in combat armor held his hand out, and a stream of fire shot from his palm, incinerating a row of target dummies with terrifying precision. Another soldier summoned a gust of wind that sliced through steel like paper. Zhang blinked. He couldn't understand how this was all happening. How had his accidental coffee levitation led to this? He hadn't even tried to control it. These soldiers, however, had been carefully engineered, enhanced, modified, yet the way they wielded their powers felt wrong. Imagine it, Mr. Zhang. Mr. Wu's voice was soft, almost coaxing, as if trying to sell a dream. Absolute control. Over fire, over air, over water. You could reshape the battlefield. You could end wars with a single gesture. Zhang's head spun. He had spent his entire life avoiding responsibility, staying under the radar, content with mediocrity. And now this man was telling him that his laziness, his lack of ambition, had somehow made him the center of a global conspiracy. I don't want to be part of this, Zhang said, his voice wavering. He was aware of how weak it sounded, but he couldn't help it. This whole thing felt like a bad dream. Mr. Wu's face didn't change, his expression as cool as ever. That's understandable. But we are not asking you, Zhang. We're offering you the opportunity of a lifetime. You were born with an extraordinary gift. It's not something you can ignore. You're too valuable. Zhang wasn't sure if it was the way Mr. Wu spoke, or the fact that his life had just been flipped upside down, but something inside him snapped. He felt the weight of the situation, the absurdity of it. It was like a cruel joke, the universe mocking his comfortable, lazy existence. "I don't want any part of your war," he said, trying to stand firm, though his palms were slick with sweat. "I just want to go back to my life. Let me leave." Mr. Wu didn't even flinch. "You think you can just walk away from this, Zhang Wei? You think this power will let you live your life as it was? You can't undo what you've become. You're already part of this world now. The only question is whether you'll help us control it, or whether you'll become a liability." His voice softened for the first time. "The decision is yours, Mr. Zhang. We'll give you time to think about it." And with that, he turned on his heel and walked out, leaving Zhang standing alone in the stark, sterile office, clutching the tablet like it might burn his hands. The room seemed to close in on him, the lights overhead flickering with a strange hum. Zhang's mind raced. He couldn't process everything. A war? Elemental weapons? Him, the centerpiece? It felt like a bad science fiction novel, but he knew one thing. He wasn't cut out for this. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a villain. He was just a man trying to make it through each day without making a mess. He was the guy who forgot his coffee in the break room and made excuses to avoid company events. He was the guy who didn't even care if he got promoted. He liked being invisible. Lu Mei, the scientist who'd shown him the footage, had been watching him from the door. He hadn't noticed her approach, lost as he was in his thoughts. She was tall, with dark glasses perched on her nose, her short, wild hair barely contained under a lab cap. She gave him a small, almost apologetic smile. "So," she started, tapping her fingers against her clipboard. "You're not exactly thrilled about all this, are you?" Zhang gave her a look, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "Thrilled? I've just been told I can control fire, water, air, and who knows what else, and I'm supposed to, what? Join some secret military program? Help you blow up countries? This is insane." Lu Mei chuckled, though it didn't seem entirely genuine. "I get it. Trust me, I do. This whole thing is a mess. But if it makes you feel any better, I didn't exactly sign up for this either." She leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms. "But here we are. Welcome to the club." Zhang stared at her, the lines between reality and absurdity starting to blur. Lu Mei wasn't like him. She was smart. Driven. She had purpose. But her eyes, those eyes were tired. Tired in the way that only someone who had been working in a pressure cooker for too long could be. She wasn't some cold, detached scientist who saw Zhang as just a tool. He could tell she hated this just as much as he did. "I didn't ask for any of this," Zhang muttered, pacing back and forth. "Why me? Why can't you just find some other soldier? Someone who's actually, what's the word, trained for this kind of thing?" Lu Mei sighed, pushing herself off the doorframe. "Because your abilities are different. You didn't have to go through all the testing, all the engineering. You're raw, Zhang. Unfiltered. We can tweak it, refine it, but we need someone like you to make the elemental weapons truly powerful." Zhang stopped pacing and faced her. "And if I say no? Then we'll have to make sure that the wrong people don't get their hands on you," Lu Mei said quietly. Her tone was no longer casual, no longer apologetic. It was cold, final. "We can't let this power fall into the wrong hands." A chill ran down Zhang's spine. He realized then just how deep the rabbit hole went. This wasn't some corporate greed. This was bigger than that. This was a global crisis in the making. Zhang slumped into the nearest chair, rubbing his temples. "I don't know what to do anymore." "You don't have to know right now," Lu Mei said, sitting down across from him. "Just think about it. We're not your enemies. We're just trying to survive in a world that's quickly losing control." Zhang looked at her. For the first time, he saw the weight of the world on her shoulders. She wasn't some villain in a high-tech lab. She was just another pawn, trying to make it out of this mess alive. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only thing that kept her human. You've got time to think, Lu Mei said again, standing up. But don't take too long. These things don't wait. Zhang sat there, alone once again, the world outside continuing to spin while his life hung in the balance. The life he'd known, the life he'd fought so hard to avoid getting involved in, was gone. All that was left was the choice he would have to make. The decision that would change everything. A few days passed. Days in which Zhang weighed the options, tried to ignore the mounting pressure, and even found himself asking if he could just run away. But no matter how much he tried to distance himself, he knew there was no escaping this. It was as if the universe had picked him up, like some kind of cosmic joke, and now he had to play along. One evening, while lying on his couch, staring at the ceiling, Zhang finally made his decision that he couldn't sit back and do nothing. Not anymore. The next morning, he walked into Sinateka's offices again. Mr. Wu was waiting for him, as calm as ever. I see you've made your decision, he said. Zhang didn't say anything at first. Instead, he just nodded. I'll help you. But I need to be clear about one thing, he said, his voice firm. I'm not doing this to be your puppet. I'm doing this to stop you. Mr. Wu's smile didn't fade. I'm glad to hear you've come to your senses, Zhang Wei. Welcome to the fight. And so it began. Zhang Wei, the most unlikely of heroes, had made his choice. He would tear down the system, destroy the weapons they were building, and stop the forces that had tried to pull him into their war. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be pretty. But at least he could say it would be his own fight. The world would never be the same. And neither would Zhang Wei. Zhang Wei walked out of the building that morning with a weight he hadn't anticipated. The cool air of Shanghai, still tinged with the haze of early morning, didn't bring the usual comfort. It felt like a warning, the kind that tickles the back of your neck when something bad is coming but you don't know exactly what. He had made the decision, joined this madness willingly, or at least as willingly as one can when backed into a corner, but now the truth of it was sinking in. His life, the life he had avoided for so long, was gone. He was now part of something bigger, something dangerous. There was no turning back. The world outside was still the same, people walking down crowded sidewalks, cars honking in the streets, the usual chaos of a city that never slept. But to Zhang, it all felt like a blur. A distraction from the reality that now surrounded him. He had agreed to help Sinatec with their elemental weapons program, though not without his own conditions. The most important of which was that he would find a way to destroy the weapons they were creating. He wasn't doing this to help them. He wasn't going to be a puppet in their global power game. Zhang's first task, as Lu Mei had explained, was to begin training. He had no idea what he was doing, and the thought of trying to control his powers made him feel sick to his stomach. He didn't want this. Not really. But here he was, thrust into the heart of a military-industrial complex that saw him as both a tool and a threat. The irony wasn't lost on him. His entire life had been about avoiding responsibility, yet now, the entire world seemed to be pressing down on his shoulders, waiting for him to make a move. He arrived at the training facility later that day, a high-security compound hidden in the outskirts of the city. It was surrounded by razor wire, armed guards, and cameras watching every step. The kind of place that seemed to exist outside the normal world, as though the rules didn't apply here. He could feel the hum of the place as soon as he walked in, a sense of purpose that was foreign to him. People moved with military precision, their eyes fixed forward, their bodies tense. He was about to enter a world where there was no room for mistakes. Mr. Zhang, Lu Mei greeted him as he stepped through the glass doors. Her usual quirkiness was absent, replaced by an air of professionalism that seemed to suit the cold, sterile environment. I'm glad you could make it. Yeah, well, I didn't have much choice, Zhang muttered. He glanced around the room, his eyes catching the walls lined with monitors and control panels. It looked like a war room, one designed for people who were used to thinking in terms of strategy and power. Not for someone like him, someone who just wanted to slip through the cracks unnoticed. Lu Mei led him to a training area, where several people were already waiting. They weren't the soldiers Zhang had seen on the video. These weren't the super soldiers using their powers with military precision. These were the researchers, the technicians, the people who spent their days trying to perfect the elemental weapons program. They were the ones who would teach him how to control his abilities or, more likely, use them for something far more sinister. Okay, Zhang, Lu Mei said, her voice calm but firm. We're going to start simple. You've already shown us some control over the elements, but now we need to refine it. First, we'll work on fire. Zhang's heart skipped. Fire? He had never tried to control fire. It had always been an accident, a flicker of heat when his emotions ran too high. Now, he was supposed to master it. I don't know about this, Zhang said, his voice suddenly tight with fear. He wanted to back out, wanted to run back to his apartment where nothing demanded anything of him. But Lu Mei's gaze was unwavering, and he knew she wasn't going to let him off the hook. We start slow. You won't burn anything down unless you want to, Lu Mei said, her tone almost reassuring. She looked over at one of the researchers, a tall man with a clipboard. He nodded and activated a small control panel. The room's temperature slowly began to rise, just a few degrees at first, but enough to make Zhang aware of the change. I want you to focus, Lu Mei instructed. Think about the fire inside you. Don't force it. Just feel it. When you're ready, raise your hand. Zhang closed his eyes, trying to block out everything around him. He focused on the strange, warm sensation that always seemed to appear when he was too relaxed. It wasn't something he understood. But he knew it existed. The heat that rose within him, the flickering, crackling energy that never seemed to have a shape or form. For a long moment, nothing happened. His hand remained at his side, motionless. He was trying to feel it, trying to grasp it, but it felt like trying to catch smoke in his hands. Then, just when he thought it wasn't going to work, the room heated up, and Zhang felt the warmth surge from his chest to his fingertips. He raised his hand, slowly at first, unsure, but then with more confidence. A small spark appeared at his fingertips, just a flicker, like the flame of a candle in the wind. It swirled for a second before flaring up into a ball of fire that hovered a few inches above his palm. Zhang gasped, instinctively jerking his hand back. The flame wavered, but didn't die. It seemed to dance in the air, responding to his hesitation. Lu Mei's face lit up with a smile. Good. Now, focus. Don't let it burn out. It was difficult. The heat felt intense, like a weight he had to hold in place, but the more he focused on it, the easier it became to maintain. The fire swirled around his hand like a controlled living thing. He stared at it, mesmerized by the way it moved. He had never experienced anything like this. The element, the power, it was his, but it also terrified him. That's good, Zhang, Lu Mei encouraged. You're learning how to control it. But Zhang was focused on the fire. It wasn't just the sensation of heat, it was the strange awareness that came with it. A sense of power, sure. But also a sense of loss. The more he controlled it, the more he understood how little he understood. The fire was unpredictable, wild. It had its own intentions. If he let it go for even a second, it would turn on him, and that was the problem. When he finally extinguished the flame by willing it out of existence, Zhang wiped the sweat from his brow. That was intense. Lu Mei nodded. You'll get better at it. But we need to move on. You've shown that you can handle the basics. Now we need to refine your control over all the elements. Fire, water, air, earth. You'll need them all. Zhang felt a deep unease settle in his stomach. This wasn't just about learning how to control his abilities anymore. This was about becoming something else. Something that was no longer just Zhang Wei.as Lu Mei led him to the next station, where a small tank of water waited for him. He thought about the decision he had made. He was in too deep now. Sinatech had made him a weapon. Whether he liked it or not, he had no choice but to play their game. He was no longer the lazy office worker, trying to live a simple life. He was now part of the machine, a weapon in their hands, and Zhang Wei didn't know if he could survive it.